welcome to Whispers of Ink. I'm Machado de Assis, and now I will read one of my stories.
Let's start with the book Last Will and Testamentary Words, which is part of my novels collection. Single chapter. Single chapter item. I hereby declare that my body shall be laid to rest in a coffin made by Joaquim Soares, who resides on Rua da Alfândega. I wish for him to know of this wish, which will also be made public. Joaquim Soares does not know me, but he deserves this honor, for he is one of our finest craftsmen, and among the most honest men in our land. This clause of the will was followed to the letter. Joaquim Soares built the coffin that would carry the body of poor Nicolau B. de Assis. He crafted it himself with care and love. And in the end, moved by a warm gesture, he asked permission not to accept any payment. He was already paid. The favor from the deceased was itself a great reward. He only asked for one thing, an official copy of that clause from the will. They gave it to him, and he had it framed and hung on a nail in his shop. After the initial surprise, other coffin makers complained that the will was absurd. Fortunately, and this is one of the benefits of social order, people from all other walks of life believed at this hand, rising from beyond the grave to bless the work of a humble craftsman, had done something rare and noble. This was in 1855. Society felt closer back then. Nothing else was talked about. Nicolau's name echoed in the newspapers of the capital for many days, then spread to those in the provinces. But life is so varied, events pile up so quickly, and human memory is so fragile, that one day came when Nicolau's act was completely forgotten. I do not intend to bring it back. To forget is a necessity. Life is like a blackboard, where destiny must erase the old stories to write new ones. It is work of pencil and sponge. No, I do not intend to bring it back. There are thousands of beautiful acts, perhaps even more beautiful than Nicolau's, that have been swallowed by forgetfulness. I've come to say that the inheritance money isn't just something random. I'm here to show you one of the strangest oddities of this century. Yes, dear reader, we're stepping right into the world of sickness. That boy you see there, born near the end of the last century, he died in 1855, at age 68, wasn't healthy or normal. Not at all. From his earliest years, he showed over and over again that something inside him wasn't right, some kind of physical flaw. There's no other way to explain how he kept destroying other kids' toys, not just the ones like his, or worse, but especially the ones that were nicer or more expensive. And what's even harder to understand is that when the toy was unique or rare, young Nicolau would comfort the kid who lost it with 2 or 3 kicks. At least one kick, every time. All of this is strange. It wasn't the father's fault. The father was an honest businessman, maybe a commission agent, as the Marquis of Lavradio once said. Most people called merchants were really just basic agents. He lived comfortably during the last part of the century, a strict and serious man who scolded his son and punished him when needed. But neither warnings nor punishments worked him. Nicolau's inner urge was stronger than all the father's beatings combined. Once or twice a week, the boy would do the same bad thing again. The family felt deep sadness. One event, in particular, was so serious that it deserves its own story. At the time, The viceroy was Count of Resende, and he was worried about building a dock at Praia de Dom Manuel. What today might seem like a small city matter was back then a major project, considering the small size of the city. But the viceroy had no money. The public treasury could barely handle regular expenses. Statecraft met philosophy in the mind of a certain official who devised a scheme as pleasant as it was profitable. Sell military ranks captain, lieutenant, and encinto those willing to make a financial contribution. When word spread, Nicolaus' father saw his chance. He could finally claim a place in the military gallery of the century, all without danger and at the same time defying old Brahmin teaching. According to the laws of Manu, warriors were born from Brahma's arms, while farmers and merchants came from his belly. By buying a captain's commission, Nicolaus' father corrected that ancient bit of spiritual anatomy. Another merchant, a rival though they were friends, caught wind of the news. Without delay, he too brought his offering to the cause. But unluckily for him and worse for the boy, he waited just a few days too long. In poor taste and with bad luck, he decided to go one step further. He asked the viceroy for another officer's post, meant for someone connected to the docks. That was the name given to those honored this way, but not for himself or his 7-year-old son. The viceroy hesitated. Yet the man doubled his donation and pulled every string he had. And so, the boy was named Ensign. It all happened in secret. Nicolaus' father only found out on Sunday, during Mass at the Carmo Church, when he saw the pair walking in together, the proud father and his uniformed son. The child wore a tiny military outfit, dressed up like a grown soldier. Niccolò, who was there too, turned pale. Then, overcome by fury, he rushed forward and tore the boy's uniform apart before any adult could stop him. It caused a huge scandal. The crowd stirred, the faithful were outraged, and the boy's family cried out in protest. For a few minutes, the church service came to a halt. Outside, under the churchyard sky, tempers flared between the fathers. Words were exchanged, sharp and bitter. From that day on, they were no longer friends. "This boy will be our ruin," Nicolaus' father shouted at home after the incident. Niccolò was punished again and again. He bore many blows, endured much pain, wept and sobbed, but never once did he truly change. Nick's behavior didn't just affect the rich kids' toys. Soon, their clothes weren't safe either. The wealthiest boys in the neighborhood learned to leave home only in the plainest outfits Armadade, usually because that was the only way to avoid Nick's claws. As time passed, his hatred grew even stranger. He started hating faces, especially pretty ones, or even faces that seemed pretty to him. The street where he lived became full of scratched, broken, and ruined portraits. Things got so bad that his father decided to lock him inside the house for about 3 or 4 months. It seemed like a good fix, and at first, it worked well. During those months, Nick acted almost like an angel. Without that strange sickness in him, he was sweet, gentle, obedient, kind to the family, and even regular with his prayers. After 4 months, his father let him out again. It was time to send him to school to learn reading and grammar. "Leave him with me," said the teacher. "Leave him with me," and this he pointed to his wooden paddle with this. "I doubt hell want to hurt other kids." What a foolish man. 3 times foolish. Yes, It's true the teacher managed to protect the prettier children and the fancier clothes by punishing Nick's first bad acts. But did Nick really get better? Not at all. Forced to hold back, to swallow his urges, he suffered twice as much. His face turned paler, sometimes even greenish, like old bronze. In some moments he had to turn away or close his eyes, he said, just to stop himself from exploding. And if he stopped going after the good-looking or well-dressed kids, he found new targets, the ones who were better at school. He hit them, took their books, threw them into the sand or the swamp. Fights, blood, hatred, that's what life gave him. And on top of that, he kept suffering cruel pains no one in his family seemed willing to understand. Nicolau was never able to study anything for long. He learned in bits and pieces, badly and inconsistently, like a homeless man each here and there, never full, never satisfied. His mind jumped from one thing to another, never staying on one subject. This was one of the saddest results of his strange, hidden illness. His father had dreamed of sending him to the university, but that dream died slowly, like a candle in the wind. At one point the father almost cursed his own son. So broken was his hope. But Nicolaus' mother stopped him. She saved everything that could still be saved. The 18th century ended, the 19th began, and still Nicolau suffered. His father died in 1807, and his mother followed 2 years later. In 1809, his sister married a Dutch doctor 13 months after their mother's death. After that, Nicolau lived alone. He was 23 years old. He dressed well, like a dandy, one of the fashionable young men of the city. But his was a strange kind of vanity. Whenever he saw another man who looked better dressed or better looking than him, he felt a sharp, terrible pain. So bad that sometimes he bit his lip until it bled. There were moments when he staggered like a drunk man. Other times, a thin line of foam would appear at the corner of his mouth, almost invisible, but real. And the rest was just as bad. Nicolau became angry, rude, impossible to be around. At home, nothing was good enough. Everything annoyed him. He threw plates at the slaves, breaking both the dishes and their spirits. He kicked the dogs, chased them away, and never stayed calm for more than 10 minutes. He barely ate, or didn't eat at all. But then, finally, he would sleep. And thank God for that. Sleep fixed everything. When he woke up, he was different. Gentle, calm, like a kind old man. He kissed the dogs behind the ears, let them lick his face, gave them the best food he had. He called the slaves by sweet, familiar names, the kind of words you use with family. And the dogs and the slaves forgot the cruelty of the day before. They answered his voice, came when he called, obeyed with love, as if this calm Nicolau was the real master, and not the angry one from yesterday. One day, while visiting his sister's house, she asked him why he didn't choose a career, something to keep him busy, to give him purpose. "You're right," he said. "I'll think about it." His brother-in-law, the Dutch doctor, suggested a diplomatic post. Nicolaus' brother-in-law was starting to suspect some illness and believed that a change of climate would be enough to cure him. So Nicolau, with a letter of introduction arranged by a friend, went to visit the Minister of Foreign Affairs. When he arrived, he found the man surrounded by several junior officials. just about to leave for the palace to deliver news of Napoleon's second downfall, news that had arrived only minutes earlier. The minister's commanding presence, the tension of the moment, the deep bows of the official Saul of it, struck Nicolau so hard that he couldn't bring himself to look the man in the eye. He tried, again and again, 6 or 8 times, to lift his gaze, but each time his eyes turned crosswise, and all he could see was a blur, a shadowy figure that hurt his eyes. His face turned pale, almost green. Nicolau stepped back, reached with trembling hands for the curtain behind him, and left without saying a word. "I don't want anything," he told his sister when he got home. "I'll stay with you and my friends." His friends were the least likable young men in town, common, unimportant people. Nicolau had chosen them on purpose. Living apart from the more powerful or important people in society was a great sacrifice for him. But he figured that if being with them caused discomfort, being among the elite would bring even more pain. So he swallowed his pride and accepted the situation. This shows that Nicolau had some basic understanding of his condition and how to manage it. With these friends, all of Nicolau's physical symptoms disappeared. He could look at them without turning pale, without crossed eyes, without swaying or feeling faint. Not only did they keep his nerves calm, but they also worked hard to make his life, if not joyful, at least peaceful. They showered him with the kindest words, spoke to him with humble gestures, or with a kind of respectful familiarity. Nicolau naturally loved people of lower status, just as sick people love the medicine that makes them feel better. He treated them with fatherly affection, praised them warmly, and often lent them money, gave them small gifts, and opened his heart to them. Nicolau had always been a man of principle, but when Brazil cried out for independence at the Ipiranga River, something changed. He threw himself into politics, and by 1823, there he was, a member of the Constituent Assembly. There's no need to guess how he handled his duties, everyone knew. Honest, selfless, and deeply patriotic, Nicolau didn't just wear these virtues lightly. They came at a heavy cost. You could say, in a way, that every day he spent in Congress drained him like blood loss. It wasn't just that he found the debates unbearable. It was the people. Certain faces were like poison to his eyes, especially on certain days. Montezuma looked clumsy to him. Vergueiro was dull, and the Andradas brothers, unbearable. Every speech, even from the less important men, felt like torture. And yet, Nicolau remained firm, and never missed a session. His name echoed through the Grand Chamber, always met with response. No matter how deep his pain, he held himself together, placing the good of the country above his own comfort. Maybe, somewhere inside, he cheered when the assembly was finally dissolved. I can't say for sure, but there's reason to believe that, despite his serious face, Nicolau felt some relief when it all ended. That joy, however, didn't last long. The exile of some leadersmen labeled as public enemies dampened his satisfaction. Those were the very men whose speeches had tormented him, but now their banishment brought him new suffering. Strange, isn't it? Even if their absence gave him some peace, it also filled him with guilt. If only he had been exiled too. His sister once said to him, "You should get married, brother." "I don't have a fiancé," he replied. "I can find you one," she offered. Really? It was actually her husband's idea. According to him, Nicolaus' problem had finally been diagnosed, a worm in the spleen, feeding on his pain. This parasite thrived not on food, but on the bitterness Niccolò felt when seeing certain events, situations or people. It was time to kill the worm. But since no chemical substance existed that could destroy it completely, the only alternative was to stop its secretion. Without it, the same result would follow. So the plan was clear. Niccolò had to marry a pretty, well-mannered girl. He had to leave town and settle on a farm where he could take with him his finest silverware, his best furniture, and his closest friends. Every morning he would receive a newspaper, specially printed just for him, filled with nothing but praise. It would remind him of his modest yet important work in the Constituent Assembly. It would speak of love affairs he never had, clever remarks he never made, and brave acts he never performed. I've already spoken to the Dutch admiral, who agreed that from time to time one of our officers should visit Niccolò just to say that he couldn't return to The Hague without first having the honor of meeting such an outstanding and charming citizen, a man blessed with rare qualities usually found apart in others. If you can convince a dressmaker Guden, perhaps to name a hat or a shawl after Niccolò, you'll help greatly in curing your brother. Anonymous love letters sent through the post are also a powerful tool. But let's start at the beginning. Marriage. Never had a plan been carried out more carefully. The bride chosen was among the most graceful young women in the capital. The bishop himself officiated the wedding. Afterward, Niccolò moved to the countryside with only a few of his simplest friends. The newspaper was published, the letters were sent, and all unwanted visitors were politely turned away. For 3 whole months, everything went perfectly. But nature, always eager to trick mankind, once again proved she held surprises no one could foresee. One way to please Niccolò was to praise his wife's beauty, elegance, and virtues. But the illness had grown deeper, and what seemed like a perfect cure turned out to be nothing more than a worsening of the disease. Nicholas, after a while, started to feel that all the praise people gave his wife was unnecessary and too much. That alone made him restless, and his restlessness made him produce that deadly mucus again. It even got to the point where he couldn't stand looking at her for long, and when he did, it was with dislike. They had some fights, which might have led to a separation if she hadn't died soon after. Nicholas felt deep, real sorrow when she passed away, but his healing didn't last long because he soon traveled to Rio de Janeiro. There, some time later, we find him among the revolutionaries of 1831. Even though it may seem bold to guess the real reasons that led Nicholas to the Campo da Acclamação on the night of April 6th to 7th. I think we're not far from the truth if we believe it was the idea of a famous anonymous Athenian. Both those who praised and those who criticized the emperor had pushed Nicholas to his limit. This man so admired and so hated whose name was repeated everywhere. Nicholas went on the streets, at the theater, in other people's homes, had become a kind of obsession. That's why Nicholas joined the 1831 movement with such passion. The emperor's abdication brought some relief. But soon, the regency found Nicholas among its opponents. Some even say he joined the Karamuru or Restoration Party, although there was no proof. What we do know is that Nicholas' public life ended when the emperor came of age. His illness had finally taken full control of his body. Little by little, Nicholas withdrew into solitude. He could no longer make certain visits or go to certain houses. The theater barely distracted him anymore. His hearing had become so sensitive that the sound of applause caused him terrible pain. Nicholas' enthusiasm for the famous Candiani and Maria, especially Candiani, had been immense. When a crowd of people pulled her carriage through the street, something they wouldn't even do for Plato himself, Nicholas felt proud and excited. But that excitement didn't last long. In fact, it turned into one of the deepest disappointments had ever felt. He stopped going to the theater altogether. He found Candiani unbearable and said he preferred the music from cheap street organs over anything she sang. Even João Caetano, whom he used to admire in the early days, no longer interested him. Slowly, Nicholas drifted away from all kinds of performances. Has lost, his brother-in-law thought. If only we could give him a new spleen. But, of course, that was impossible. The brother-in-law knew there was no hope. Nothing at home seemed to cheer him up anymore. So Nicholas tried writing. He started with small literary projects, poems about his family, prize-winning verses, and political odes. But those didn't last long. If anything, they might have made him feel worse. One day he suddenly saw his work as ridiculous, and hearing applause for poets like Gonçalves Dias made him think the whole country was shallow and tasteless. This bitterness, born from some physical illness, only made his condition worse. Soon, he began suffering serious episodes that kept him in bed for weeks. Taking advantage of this moment, his brother-in-law removed every thick book from the house. Even harder to understand was how Nicholas began dressing more carelessly after a while. He had always taken pride in his appearance. For years, he bought his suits from Plum, one of the best tailors in town. Every single day he visited Desmarais and Gerard on Ouvidor Street, the royal hairdresser's, to get his hair done. But now, something changed. Maybe he thought the title hairdressers to the court was too silly, so he punished them by going to the cheapest barber he could find. As for why he gave up his elegant style, honestly, no one can explain it. Unless it was simply age catching up with him, which doesn't seem likely. And if that wasn't strange enough, he also fired his cook, without giving any reason at all. That too remains a mystery. Nicholas, on his brother-in-law's suggestion, started hosting 2 dinners a week. His guests always agreed that his cook was better than any other in the city. The food really was good, some dishes even great, but their praise was exaggerated, said with the clear goal of pleasing Nicholas. For a while, everything went smoothly. But then came one Sunday, after an especially splendid dinner, when Nicholas suddenly fired the very man who had brought him so many joyful hours at the table. Why would he do such a thing? No one could understand. He was a thief, Nicholas told his brother-in-law. Nothing helped, not the brother-in-law's pleas, not the efforts of Nicholas' sister or their friends, not even Nicholas' own wealth. From that day forward, Nicholas grew darker and sadder. His spleen began to act up constantly, and worms multiplied inside him by the millions at least. That's what the brother-in-law believed, though no one could be sure if it was true. In his final years, Nicholas lived in misery. You could almost say he turned green with anger, his eyes wild with irritation. He seemed to suffer more from his own rage than from anything he caused others. Little things set him off. A kind word, a talented artist, a carriage, a tie, a poem, a clever remark, even an interesting dream, all could trigger a breakdown. Did he simply give up on life? It certainly looked that way when he refused medicine from the best doctors in court without a second thought. Friends tried pretending the pills were prescribed by a local quack, but it was already too late. 2 weeks later, death took him quietly. When the brother-in-law learned about Nicholas' final ordering that his coffin be built by Joaquim, Soreshi cried out in disbelief. "That man builds terrible coffins." "Be patient," his wife interrupted gently. "We must honor my brother's wish."
Thank you for listening so far. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like our channel and click the bell to be notified whenever a new book is read. Have you heard of Machado de Assis? Machado de Assis, born in Rio de Janeiro in 1839, is considered one of the greatest writers in Brazilian literature and a master of psychological realism. He was a novelist, poet, playwright, and short story writer whose works explore the complexities of human behavior with irony, subtlety, and deep introspection. Among his most famous novels are Dom Casmurro, which questions truth and memory, and the posthumous memoirs of Brás Cubas, a satirical narrative told by a deceased man. Machado's literature often reflects the contradictions of Brazilian society, addressing issues like race, class, power, and identity in a sophisticated yet accessible style. Despite being born into poverty and facing racial prejudice, Machado de Assis rose to become the president of the Brazilian Academy of Letters and a symbol of literary excellence. His sharp wit and profound observations about society and the human soul make his works timeless and universally relevant. Today, he is recognized not only as a Brazilian icon, but also as a world-class author whose legacy continues to influence generations of writers and thinkers. Machado de Assis shows us that literature can be both elegant and critical, intimate and universal, humorous and profound. His stories remain as powerful and thought-provoking today as they were more than a century ago. Machado is a treasure of world literature, and through his voice, we discover the infinite layers of the human experience.